So yesterday, the longest day of the year. And as I looked at that, and as I look at anything that we as human beings label significant or give special meaning to, it always piques my interest for us to look back historically and go, where did all this come from? And I think about all of the civilizations that preceded the one that you and I are experiencing right now, and the fact that most of these civilizations did not have the technology that we have now. So their lives were centered around the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun. You know, it isn't until probably within the last 100 years and the experience of electricity that we have lived in a sense of artificiality, meaning that even our sporting events can take place at night now because there's these big Klieg lights that give off the illusion of light. But think about before that. So, you know, all of those kinds of things. Think of the hunter-gatherer civilization, think of the agricultural civilizations, and you start to realize that everything was predicated around the rising of the sun and the setting of the sun. And that once that sun went down, most activity did what? It ceased. And yet you and I live in a civilization, in a time where there's artificiality 100% of the time. And a lot of times we have to regulate our ability, our cycle, to be able to rest. Whereas before it was a natural component of life itself. And as I begin to look at that, I think about those civilizations, and I wonder in my mind what they must have thought when they would see this big ball of fire rise into the sky. And as these civilizations progressed, they began to develop a deeper, a broader sense of consciousness where they realized that the growing of the crops depended upon somehow that big ball of fire in the sky. And so the big ball of fire then became a god that they worshipped. And what did they have to do? They had to appease that god. And so all of these rituals began to be established. And they began to think that if there was a favorable agricultural season, then it was because they had pleased that big ball of fire in the sky. And when there was not a favorable season, then they had done something wrong and they probably sacrificed somebody, you know? And so over time, and over the repetition of time, and over the study of the rising of this sun, they began to realize that there were cycles, or there were seasons. And then they realized that in these cycles and in these seasons, there were particular moments where the sun lasted far longer than it did. It's just cell phone day here. So the rising of the sun and the timing of that and the review of that led them to understand that at particular points of the year, there was a time when that daylight was elongated, and there was a time when that daylight was diminished. So we, in our human language, then attach certain words to that. We call it solstice. And what we know is that there is a summer solstice and there is a winter solstice. And we know that depending upon what hemisphere we live in, that because we are in the northern hemisphere, we are experiencing the summer solstice. Those who live in the other side of the world, like in Australia, they're experiencing the shortest day of the year. And when you start to look at that from a sense of spirituality or from consciousness, what does it teach us? What do we know cosmology-wise? What have we come to understand just through the study and the understanding of our planet, our solar system, all of that? We've come to realize that it has nothing to do with the diminishment of that which is in the sky, but it has everything to do with what? The revolving of our planet. And the fact that there are times when, as the planet revolves, we are exposed in elongated ways to that which is the sun. And in other cycles, we are on the other side and we have a denser experience of that, or a lesser experience of that. And so what we learn from that is that it has nothing to do with appeasing a god in the sky, but it has everything to do with understanding what? our relationship to something that is, you ready? Something that is constant. And so the solstice teaches us that we get to experience, depending upon our hemisphere, a longer relationship with that which is daylight, and at other times of the year, we experience a shorter relationship with that which is daylight. But does that in either end of the spectrum have anything to do with that which is the sun? Because the sun in and of itself is constant. And solstice then becomes like the ebb and the flow of the experience of the sun. And what we've learned about the sun is its constancy. And so today when I talk about the solstice of the soul, I start to see an overlay with our understanding of the sun and our understanding of our own sense of self, or our spirituality, or what we call our soul. And if you've been a part of this philosophical path, you've heard over and over again that you are not a body, you are a soul. And that your soul is having the experience that it's having right now via this vehicle that you've had. And even though there is an ebb and flow within us physically, and you know what I mean by that, right? Sometimes we're all that in a bag of chips, and sometimes we ain't. Sometimes we experience illness, and sometimes we experience health. But even in all of those different polarities of experience, what is the truth about who we are as a soul? And that is that we are constant. And we take that constancy, and in our language, our science of mind language, we say not only is our soul constant, but the part of the soul, or the totality of the soul, is whole. Now, isn't that amazing? Because aren't there many times in our human experience where we do not think that we are whole? And isn't it amazing that civilizations prior to us probably thought that there was not a constancy to that which is the sun, and yet we've come to understand that it is. When will we then come to understand that there is a constancy to our wholeness, regardless of our human experience? And therein lies the quest. Therein lies the path. Therein lies the opportunity for you and I as we go along our journey of understanding and realizing who and what we are. So you see then that our lives are also revolving, just like our planet is revolving. Our lives are revolving. And we have good periods and we have not so good periods. But even in those periods, what have you come to understand and hopefully accept? As that your wholeness, regardless, has never diminished. And so it's interesting when you start to think about this. Because as we reflect upon our lives, we look at certain eras of our lives. Have you ever noticed how we romanticize the past a lot? You ever know, like in Hollywood, they talk about the golden age of Hollywood. Well, when those people who they talk to about the golden age, when they were in it, they were just complaining about everything as well. And then suddenly it's the golden age. And so you and I have these periods of our lives that we label the golden age and the good old days. Do you remember when? And what we're really doing is we're romanticizing those particular phases of our life. But those phases of our life that we are romanticizing are no different than what's taking place in our life right now. It's just that sometimes in the involvement of life, we don't have the perspective. But what we start to see and what we are charged to see and to understand is constancy. The constancy of wholeness. The constancy of wholeness in regards to ourself as a soul. Wholeness then teaches us that at any given moment, there is the power of restoration. The power of restoration. Restoration is not something that sits upon a shelf and that you and I have to earn. Wholeness is something that begs for our recognition. And so here's the interesting part about you as a metaphysician, or you as a student of this thing we call mental science. is that knowing that wholeness exists, and this is a great thing for you to chew your brain around for a little bit, so listen carefully. As a student of this understanding and accepting, I'm going to assume that you are accepting that you are 100% whole all the time, even when you don't recognize it or even when you don't allow it. So that wholeness is there. When we experience our earthly experiences, the illnesses that we have, we understand that the wholeness has never been diminished. What we do a lot of times in our human experience is we pray. What we call prayer is spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer, and we're affirming that which is whole make its way to the predominant experience of our life. And I will tell you that many times we are successful in that, and we give thanks and we say, wow, we've had a manifestation. We've had a manifestation of prayer. Sometimes the wholeness doesn't reveal itself in the way that we would like it to. And so we go through periods of judgment, and we go through periods of, why am I not doing this right? But I will tell you, in every single experience of every one of you sitting in this chair today, there will be a part of our life where we will transition, where we will leave this earthly physical skin suit, and our soul, which is constant like the sun, our soul will then do what? It will go on to the next level of activity, to the next adventure. And those of us who remain in the density of this human experience might look at something like that and go, it didn't work. What didn't work? We say that the prayer didn't work. Or we talk about how we weren't a good enough manifester. And sometimes in our emotionality and in our romanticizing of what we think that it should be, then we create judgments. Not realizing that healing also, and the restoration of wholeness, healing and the restoration of wholeness also takes place sometimes when we do what? When we transition into the next experience. Who are we to say which is better? Who are we to say, or who are we to judge or classify how wholeness wants to express itself? And so when you look at the advancement of consciousness, as you look at all of those civilizations before us, you look at the ritual, you look at some of the histrionics, you look at some of the things that were more adopted from a place of fear rather than from a place of knowledge. You look at the growth, you look at your own growth. I will tell you, we will continue to grow in our awareness of what wholeness means. What I mean is that we will look at this cycle of life and we will understand first and foremost that it is constant. And in our human experience, sometimes we will mourn and we will grieve, and that is natural for us. But what we are taught is we never stay in one place. We do not stay in the grief, we do not stay in the mourning, because we become to understand the constancy of life. And we will all be there. And we will all have our time and our experience. So what we've learned about the sun from a cosmological perspective is that it is the constant life force, and that the earth revolves. And when our cycle in the northern hemisphere is closest, we have a longer experience of it. And when the earth continues its revolution and our northern hemisphere is farther away, we have a shorter experience of it. But in all of this revolving of the earth, the sun is constant. What does all of this mean? It means that I want you to begin to think about you as a soul rather than you as a body. I want you to start thinking of yourself as a soul that is constant rather than a human that is steeped in a wound that happened to you at some point in your lifetime. Because if you think of yourself in terms of a past wound or experience, then it's like being in an ancient civilization. and forgetting and not understanding the power of what the sun is, or the power of the constancy. What is the constancy that is equivalent to that which is the sun? That constancy is wholeness. That constancy is unity. And so I love the test that you and I are given. Several weeks ago, I had bronchitis, and as I lay there in the midst of all the messiness of it, when at its peak, I can tell you, I was not thinking about wholeness. I was thinking about, get me out of this, and I couldn't wait for it to be over. And what I realize sometimes is that what I've come to realize is that there is great value in every single phase of everything. It's just that when we are in the discomfort, sometimes our immediate reaction is want to do anything in order to get out of the discomfort. Not realizing that even in the discomfort, as insane as it sounds, there is wholeness. There is wholeness. And so what our founder, Ernest Holmes, wrote in our big textbook, The Science of Mind, he said that reason declares that which is infinite cannot be divided against itself. I need to read that again. Reason declares that which is infinite. Well, what is infinite? You are. You are. The soul of you is infinite. That which is infinite cannot be divided against itself. The infinite is, therefore, indivisible and consequently a perfect unit. Again, this is the message that we drive home repeatedly, that what you are is infinite potentiality. What you are at your very core is wholeness. You are not your body. You are not your resume. You are not the things that you have accomplished even in this lifetime. What you are is a soul. And what is your soul's mission? What is your soul's purpose? I think we all have the same mission and purpose. And I think it is to transcend the illusion of your finite nature. To transcend the density or the lack of education, to transcend the ignorance, to transcend the idea of separation at all cost and in all ways and in all opportunities throughout the remainder of our years on this planet. That's our soul's mission. And so isn't it wonderful that we get things like bronchitis? Isn't it wonderful that we get things like divorce? Isn't it wonderful that we get things like our entire business collapsing? Isn't it wonderful that these things happen to us in order for our soul to do what? To remember what? Wholeness at all times, in all ways, and through all experience. There is nothing, hear me, there is nothing that you have ever gone through that took you out of the experience of wholeness. There is no level of darkness that will ever take us out of the experience of the sun. It's just that whatever we are at and whatever we can see, sometimes we are required to look beyond that and to remember and to know. Ernest says all of it is present at any and every point within itself. How many of us remember that 100% of the time when you're in it? All of it. What is the it? All of it. That which is God. That which is source. That which is divinity in and of itself. That which is wholeness. All of it. That which is life is present at any and every point within itself. That which is life. Imagine those of our loved ones that we have watched transcend. The moment that they took their last breath, guess what was still there? Life. Life then rushes in and expresses itself and in an entirely different dimension and in an entirely different way. When you were up against the wall and paralyzed by your pain and your wound, guess what was there? Life. Life whispering, beckoning, calling us to remember the truth of who and what we are. All of it is present at any and every point within itself. It is not approaching a point nor receding from it, but it is always at that point. The whole of God is present at any and every point within God. It was to this indwelling spirit that the master teacher Jesus prayed, "For God is within man as well as throughout all of creation." It is that thread of the all-sustaining beauty which runs through all and doth all unite. His lines have gone out into all places. There is no place where God is not. There is no place where God is not. Just like in our earthly experience, there is no place where the sun isn't actually shining. So just because there is cloud cover does not mean that the sun doesn't exist. Just because we are having the winter solstice does not mean that there are parts that we can't get on a plane and go to Australia and experience the summer solstice. There is always an opportunity to be able to experience that which we feel we're being denied of. But there is no denial. Oh my God, I didn't even have that in my notes, but there's the quote of the day. There is no such thing as the denial of wholeness. Just as there is no such thing as the denial of the sun. There's no such thing. So then what do you and I experience when we insist that there is? What are we experiencing? Madness, illusion, insanity. In this fantastic book, The Untethered Soul, the author, Michael Singer, gives an example. And one of the chapters is called Removing Your Inner Thorn. This is the insanity. Removing your inner thorn. And he gives you a scenario. And he says, what if, in your experience, you get a thorn in your arm? And he goes, this thorn is so painful. And what we know about this thorn is you have two options. One option is remove the thorn. The other option is to build your life around the thorn. In other words, you've got this thorn in you. And so imagine if you're one of those people who sleep like I sleep, you're tossing and turning and rolling over. And every time you roll over on the thorn, what happens? Ow! And so it affects the way you sleep. Every time you go to hug an individual, you have to say, don't touch my arm. Don't touch my arm. I got my thorn here. You know, and so you begin to alter the way in which you actually interact with people. As you go on a hike through the forest and you're having to brush all of the stuff away, every single time a vine or a twig of a tree hits, ow, you hit the thorn. And so in all of the pain of existing with this thorn, you get an idea. And you invent a device that covers the thorn so that when you sleep, it will create a pressurized vacuum so that the thorn isn't touched so that you can get better sleep. You know, that also works when you go to hug people. And so you wear this thing and then that thing gets on late night television and it becomes a marketing sensation and everybody else in the world who has a thorn buys one. And you make lots of money. And then the problem is now that you've made lots of money, you're feeling more attractive about yourself, and so you fall in love with somebody, but you still have this thorn. And so now all of this love has to be associated around the thorn. What was the other option? Just take the thorn out. Right? Therein lies the insanity of living with our wound. Of living with our story, of living with our diagnosis as our identity. As living with all of the things that have, all of the shortcomings, all of the things, all of the failures. That's the thorn. And we adjust, isn't this crazy? We adjust our lives around the thorn rather than what? Just pulling it out. Oh my God, I was thinking about this morning, and I remember I went to a naturopath. I found this woman in Alabama when I was in Alabama, and we were doing some work, and all of a sudden one day she gasped, and she went, I don't know what she was doing, her little woo-woo mumbo-jumbo on me, and she gasped, and she said, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, you are a shaken baby. And when she said that, I was like, I was? And I got all emotional. And she goes, oh my God. And she's doing her little, and I'm sitting there going, I was a shaken baby. Where 10 minutes before I didn't know that I was a shaken baby. And I remember I got in the car and I called a friend. I went, I was a shaken baby. And she went, oh my God. And then I got home and I went, so? What does that have to have any relevance whatsoever with who I am right now? But think about it. Oh my God, I could have got some mileage out of that. I could have created a lot of excuses as to why I'm so weird. I could have done all kinds of things with that. And I laugh now, and I think, where are those among us who can gather together and go, so? But what we do is we hold each other's thorns in this sacred, sacrosanct place, and we build our lives around that. And what we come to realize is that is the illusion, and that is the insanity. Just as we would look at ancient civilizations who worshiped a god and call them ignorant because they didn't know any better, you and I operate in this level of ignorance when we begin to identify ourselves with this stuff where all you have to do is go, that's not my truth anymore. Stop getting mileage out of your wounds. Because I'll tell you why. The next thing that wants to come can't come until you and I, individually and collectively, allow space for that to happen. So you're hearing it from me today. Some huge things are unfolding for us. Huge things. I get it. I see it. I know it. I don't even have to explain how I know it. But there's a requirement to that. There is a requirement to that, and the requirement is it's time to pluck the thorn, both individually and collectively, and to begin to understand and know this idea, this divine word called constancy. Constancy, the constancy of wholeness. So the solstice of our soul, the solstice teaches us that there's a constancy of the sun. The soul teaches us that there is a constancy of life. And so the solstice of my soul, the solstice of your soul, is to realize that there is never a place, just as our founder Ernest Holmes says, there is never a place where that which is God, where that which is life, does not exist. That was true before you knew this. It's true as you delve into this, and it will be true as you begin to expand and understand and integrate this. And there it is, and so it is. Thank you.